What would it take for you to risk your life to abandon your country? Today, we're going to take a look into the Russian soldiers that are seeking out ways to turn themselves into Ukraine. For some, they're just trying to survive the war, but for others, they're choosing to defect and fight back against Vladimir Putin. So far, more than 300 Russian soldiers have surrendered to Ukraine under the I Want To Live project. And that's just a fraction of what we might call surrender curious. As of May 2023, so this data is more than a year old at this point, the project spokesperson said that their hotline had received a total of 16,000 requests to surrender. Their website had been accessed over 36 million times, with 32 million of those visits coming from inside of Russian territory. That is a lot of Russians trying to get out of this war, and we're going to get into why that is, as well as some individual accounts of soldiers actually defecting through this program. But first, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video. Anyone who's watched this channel for a while knows that we try our absolute best to provide multiple perspectives around certain events to give us the best possible idea of what's going on. Of course, that's easier said than done. Not very many people have the time or the resources to sift through dozens, even hundreds of articles covering the same subject, but with the flood of information that we're facing on a day-to-day basis, that's kind of what it would require. So I'm happy to partner again here today with the best tool that I have found to help you navigate our chaotic information space, Ground News. Ground News breaks down topics to show you how they're being covered from organizations historically on the political left, right, or center. Then they even provide a factuality rating, again, based off of the publication's track record. Take, for example, this recent coverage around the congressional report on the Afghanistan withdrawal that was released on September 9th. So we've got 105 total sources, and you can choose to select options from the left, right, or center. And then my favorite feature here, or one of my favorite features here, you can hide the paywall articles. That is always so annoying, right? You're interested in a topic, you find a good article, you click on it, think you're going to read it. Just kidding. Now, while all of that work at this point is all well and good, and you're taking additional steps to better understand the information space, we all still do have our own blind spots. And Ground News actually has a feature to help with that. Strangely enough, it's called, you guessed it, Blind Spot. So on this page, they list out topics that are getting heavily skewed coverage from one side or another, meaning that you may not come across these in your daily news consumption. So again, I've worked with Ground News in the past, and I'm happy to continue spreading awareness about their product. I mean, look, this digging into stories from multiple angles is kind of what I do all day, every day, and I haven't found any other website or app nearly as effective as Ground News. So if you want to start seeing through media bias, use my link ground.news/Preston or scan the QR code on the screen for 40% off a Vantage subscription. Now, the I Want To Live project is operated by the Main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine, the GUR. The service is designed to help Russian servicemen who do not want to participate in the Russian invasion of Ukraine to safely surrender to the Ukrainian armed forces. The organization has a website, a Telegram channel, and they're active all across social media, presenting to Russian soldiers and their families an alternative option to dying at the front. Moving over to their website, they have right here on the front, quote, "Do you see that you are not greeted not with flowers, but with fire and curses? Do you notice that the commanders are the first to run away? All those who voluntarily surrender will be registered as captured in battle. This will preserve all payments and benefits due to Russian military personnel." And in case there were any concerns about how these prisoners might be treated in Ukrainian captivity, they also list some guarantees of prisoners right on their website, saying, 1, compliance with the Geneva Conventions for the treatment of prisoners of war. 2, provision of assistance and monitoring of the conditions of stay of prisoners of war by the International Committee of the Red Cross, and legal support by other international organizations. 3 meals a day, medical care, the possibility of regular contact with relatives. 4, possibility of exchange for servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine who are in captivity in the Russian Federation by voluntary request. And 5, possibility to apply for asylum in Ukraine or other European countries. Those last two are worth highlighting briefly. We've seen multiple accounts of Russian soldiers who are captured, and when they go back to Russia in some sort of prisoner swap, they quickly find themselves moved right back into the front, often into Storm Z-type units, the assault units taking the vast majority of the casualties in this war. They're not treated well. They're not often welcomed back as heroes, but almost like traitors. So you can imagine in a situation like this, if a Russian soldier voluntarily surrenders and turns himself over to Ukraine, they're probably not going to raise their hand to immediately be sent back in some sort of prisoner swap. And they do have the option through this program to possibly, depending on the situation, apply for asylum to stay in Ukraine or other European countries. So you can see how this could be appealing, but Russian soldiers know that if they're caught even considering surrendering, they're likely to face pretty harsh punishments. Interestingly, those harsh punishments are actually some of the reasons that Russian soldiers choose to defect in the first place. I mean, just listen to some of their own accounts. We have mobilized soldier here, Vladimir Solovyov, who refused to participate in combat operations in Ukraine and deserted. He was on the run for 2 months, and all this time he was blackmailed, intimidating his relatives, who were forced to call and ask him to return to his unit. In the end, the private was caught and thrown into a cage for re-education. More on those cages here in a second. Unfortunately, that's not a term that was mixed up in translation. So 10 days later, Solovyov and others were sent as usual into a bloody assault in which he was wounded but survived. Instead of evacuation, they sent him into another assault. So instead of treating his wounds and sending him back to rehabilitate and get back to normal, they just pushed him right back into the front. But here, too, they say he was lucky. Ukrainian Marines from the 36th Brigade destroyed his entire group, and Vladimir himself was miraculously captured. So we have this one form of punishment that's well known at this point: throw the bad actors into storm units. These are assault detachments that are sustaining incredibly high casualties in this war. Essentially, like, it's cannon fodder, right? They're probably going to die. Put them in the unit where they're likely to die. But that's not the only punishment currently facing Russian soldiers. They can also be, quote, thrown in the pit. Now, this is a standard method of torture that's been used by various pro-Russian groups in the Donbass since 2014. It's not new, and it's been reported on for a long time. There are certain organizations supported by Russia who threw into the pit, if you will, peaceful Ukrainians who did not renounce their country, Ukrainian prisoners of war, and later unwanted militants from other groups. And the punishment looks roughly like this. The guilty, whoever's going to end up in the pit, they also sometimes use basements or cellars, dark areas like that, but they dig a pit 2 meters wide and 3 meters deep, into which 3 to 4 people are kept practically in open air for days, weeks, and sometimes months. At the same time, these prisoners, if you will, inside of the Russian military, don't receive any sort of normal medical treatment or normal food, and there's no investigation or any other legally justified actions carried out. So this is a unit punishment, if you will. Throw them in the pit, rehabilitate them, and then we'll figure out what to do with them later. Now, keep in mind, this sort of treatment is regularly discussed with relatives and intercepted phone calls. It's not a secret. The Russian soldiers can see this playing out, and in turn, it seeks some of them to find better options, like surrendering to Ukraine. And that's exactly what Goga did earlier this year. This is Goga. He served in the Russian Navy for 10 years before defecting to Ukraine with Russian state secrets after setting a ship on fire in the Baltic Fleet. Now, Goga did not support Putin's invasion, and he tried to break his contract and resign from the fleet, but the command decided that they didn't want to let him go, and instead they decided to transfer him to the infantry. As Russian forces were taking more casualties inside of Ukraine, you saw various Russian units from around the military kind of reorganized to backfill some of those losses, and Goga was set to be a part of that. At that time, Goga was already in contact with an organization that we've talked about on this channel before, known as the Freedom of Russia Legion. It's a group of Russians that have defected to Ukraine and are now fighting back specifically against Putin. This operation, codenamed Fishing, lasted more than a year, where throughout that time, Goga was able to transmit secret data from the Russian Navy back to his contacts in Ukraine. And when both parties felt he was at risk of being discovered, Goga started a fire on the ship, causing significant damage, and was successfully extracted in an operation by the Freedom of Russia Legion and the I Want To Live project. GOR spokesperson Andrei Yusov said, quote, "This is our first operation on the Baltic Fleet. For the enemy, it became a shock and a big surprise. After this operation, reshuffles, investigations, and punishments took place in the middle of the Baltic Fleet. It is clear that certain heads flew there." Now, it's hard to capture just how dangerous these actions were by Goga, but the story of Silver actually paints a picture of what's sometimes needed to pull off this sort of operation. Back in the winter of 2024, a Russian FPV pilot codenamed Silver contacted the Freedom of Russia Legion in what would eventually be named Operation Ocheret. According to Silver himself, he said he was motivated to cooperate with Ukraine by the systematic war and other crimes of his command, including extrajudicial executions, beatings, and extortions of the occupation unit, of the Russian unit that he served in. Throughout their communications with Silver, the Freedom of Russia Legion was able to obtain valuable intelligence data about the location, number, and intentions of the enemy in a specific area of the front. Then when Silver and the Freedom of Russia Legion decided that it was time to conduct the extraction, Silver set off explosive charges, dropping grenades into the sleeping quarters of his commanding officers, supposedly killing or wounding as many as 15 in that blast. He then traveled along a pre-planned route, mining his tracks the entire way, booby traps for any Russian soldiers trying to track him down, and crossed into Ukrainian territory and has since done press briefings with the GUR as well as the Freedom of Russia Legion. One more successful story of pulling Russian soldiers off the line and transitioning into uniform of the Freedom of Russia Legion. Now, while Russia has blocked access to the I Want To Live project as well as their Telegram channel inside of Russia, I do think it's something still worth sharing and getting out there for as many people as possible to see. Now, I do understand that there's some controversial aspects here as well. I personally think that it's a good thing for Russians to exit the war and hopefully choose to defect and fight back against Vladimir Putin. But I understand how some of these actions, especially inside of Russia, could be viewed as traitorous, even shameful. Again, it's the question of what would it take for you to risk your life to abandon your country and possibly even fight for the other side. I mean, no matter who you are or where you're from, that's a significant ask that certainly weighs heavily on anyone considering it. But that's all I got for now. Again, don't forget to check out Ground News, the sponsor of this video. Great resource that I use myself. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.